Hey, Annie, I'll just a minute, I'll mute all and please unmute yourself.
Okay. Okay, I am unmute. I am about to share. Okay, so welcome back again, and you get to hear me talk about managing AI and KM projects. This is going to be interesting because there are lots of areas that currently exist. The pre-class assignment, Moria has already explained that one, and it's a good read. So hopefully you'll read that and gain some knowledge from it as well. My agenda today is going to be, I'm going to talk a little bit about current project management because sometimes it seems as though with AI and KM projects, we kind of circumvent that. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about managing intelligence and just looking at what I've said about artificial intelligence and how you need to scope it, so to speak. And then I'm going to talk about some KM areas like peer assistance, document management, which we've talked about extensively, curation, which we kind of tied to intelligence, but curation is actually something that crosses the boundaries. And then talk about we need to have this holistic plan and how this kind of hits with complex adaptive operations. So my big emphasis here is, don't start at zero, leverage what exists. We have so many methodologies and frameworks that actually set us out in the right direction. And the whole emphasis about any methodology or framework is that it's not absolute, especially if it's theory, then, it's written because it's perfect. This is what you're supposed to do. But we all know that practice is not perfect. So therefore, you must tailor it in order for it to fit within your organization. That's what makes us different. A lot of times if we follow the same pattern, then we're basically robots in an organization. What we need to do is identify what differentiates us and how we actually do our work. So these methodologies and frameworks, I think I talked about a few of them early on, are very important as a starting point because they at least give you the areas that you need to consider along with the tasks that need to be included within the work plan. So I want to come back to also artificial intelligence. Remember before I emphasized that it's products, processes, and insights. So there's some clear levels of abstraction within intelligence that we can begin with and that we can kind of scope. We may not do products the same way as we do processes, and insights, we have to also take into account those, which is kind of interesting because I was looking at an enterprise architecture framework. And I noticed that with the same thing that we go with that old adage of data, information, knowledge, and then, wisdom, that triangle. I noticed that in EA, it has no place for intelligence. So those models or those frameworks work because they give us everything else that we need, but then we need to also engage the insights piece so that we can build the structures that we need to have insights. A lot of organizations, even with artificial intelligence, what they tend to do is they go with the existing operational data. And the emphasis is that you may not need all of that data. So you need to think that through and say, what do I need as insights? And what have I already gotten that's proven that I can use within my insights so I don't always have to roll up from the primitive level. So one of the things that I want to emphasize here as we're going through this, even with project management of these projects, know the level of abstraction or where it is inserted in the enterprise. That's what we need to do. We need to understand the impacts of what we're adding to or removing from our enterprises. So just to make that somewhat a little clearer, it might be a little confusing, but the enterprise is broken down into several types of business units. It may even have strategic business units at a high level. The whole enterprise decomposes. So when we break down at the enterprise level, there may be some AI KM projects that might need to be put in place. You might have products, process, or insight. Again, when you have your executive levels and they're all working together, most of them are doing strategy formation. And if they're doing strategy formation, where are they getting that information from? So in order for them to gain insights for their strategic direction, they have to build the structure of intelligence and then be able to extract knowledge from it so that they can make decisions. So you have that at one level. And then you go to the next level where you have these business units that might be HR, that might be engineering, or all of these different business levels that also might be able to improve performance through AI and KM. So then at that level of abstraction, again, you're looking at what products I'm putting into place. Like, for example, when we talk about data, what products am I bringing in that help me to capture my data? You're seeing in the industry now that with digital transformation, you have data catalogs, you have data lineage, you have all of these types of ways that we can actually represent our data. So that's another level of extraction. And then you go even further, because you might go down to an individual office that might be much smaller, but it also needs maybe robotic process automation so that that particular office can execute better. So now we begin to see the picture as we fill in the pieces at each level. What do I need in order to be able to to gain knowledge about how to improve the performance of my organization at the level of abstraction that I'm working. So I'm an engineer by trade, and I've always been taught that you don't go after the whole, that you actually plan from the top down and you build from the bottom up, because that way you can catch certain things on the way up. So think about what level you're actually going at when we go into these types of projects. Okay. Now I want to emphasize a little bit about the current project management. All of these things still exist. We kind of, with KM and AI as well, a lot of times it seems as though we just kind of jump in there and say we're going to do this and we're going to get it done. I've seen this happen in even organizations that I'm a part of. I've seen where they say, well, we need to integrate data. So all of a sudden they buy an iPaaS, which is an integrated platform as a service type of technology. And then they say, well, you know what, perhaps we need a data management tool, a catalog of some sort. And there's no planning around it. There's basically no scoping. There's no schedule. And cost is not a problem, because this is like something that executives want in place because they know they need to integrate the data. And all of a sudden, you also have this thing about privacy and confidentiality, and everything stops because no one considered all of the pieces. So when we're putting together these plans, these things still exist. You still need to scope the project. You need to still come up with a viable schedule. You hopefully do cost and also looked at optimization, costs and trade-offs. You definitely need quality along the way. And here's one of the things that falls short too. And with knowledge management, this has happened for years. When people first put knowledge management into place, they only put a CKO there. So they've managed to put one individual to run this entire thing, and they wondered why it failed. There were no resources. The same way you're looking at non-labor resources, you must also look at labor resources and the skills that are required to perform the work. And then we get to a point where some things fail because of the communications. One of the things you have to do in any project is have a communications plan. How do I keep people engaged in this? How do I keep people knowing what's coming down the pike? How do I keep people, I feel like people own it? How do I make certain that people feel that they are going to see what's better, what's in it for me? So we got to communicate. And again, what we failed at doing is that integration. When we put these projects into place, they don't work in a vacuum. They impact other areas. And last but not least, which was one of the big ones, is risk management. All of this goes up against risk, and somehow or another we forget that we need to look at probability, we need to look at exposure, and we need to look at impact of what's happening. A lot of times things get pulled back, even like with using autonomous cars. At one time, autonomous cars was in the media so much and everybody wanted them, and I've seen it's died down now. Why? Because they've seen that there are some errors with it. Someone is hit by and killed by an autonomous car. Someone is drunk and sitting in the car and doesn't know what's going on. The autonomous car does not recognize people of color at nighttime. So these are the things that we need to think about when we're putting the project in place, that we tend to forget about. And these old methodologies or these management techniques are generic, and they go into every type of project. So I want to bring back to the artificial intelligence framework, which I said these were all the processes and phases that we needed to look at. And these also, when we start to integrate them, when we're setting up the scope and the strategy and all of that, let's look at what we need to do for performance management when we're working at any level. The whole emphasis is to improve. Let's look at, how we're making these decisions for cognition, because we want to gain knowledge within them. And also organizational learning. You don't want to just put something into place. You have to know by some means that it is going to improve or it is going to change something for the better. And I don't always say when improve, because sometimes we need to sustain things. And sometimes, we improve and we may not actually recognize a performance gain, but we actually sustain it at the same level. Whereas if we stayed operating the old way, it wouldn't be sustained at that level. Knowledge management, this is part of when we're doing projects again. Knowledge management needs to be considered across all. What are you trying to gain out of these projects, and what are you trying to emphasize so that you can make decisions, or so that you can say, you know what, it worked or it didn't work, or I have to at this point have change management to see. This ties right back to communications, and most people don't realize that change management is communications and training. You can't just make a change and integrate into your systems and then turn around and say, well, my people know what they're going to be doing. You have to make certain that they're aware of what the changes are going to be, and you have to make certain that they are prepared to handle the changes so that they can continue to operate. Artificial intelligence, we have 3 levels. Am I putting a product into place? Am I putting an application in place? Or am I putting insights into place? That makes a difference as to how I would go about working this, okay? And along the top, you see that I have data, information, intelligence, knowledge, and cognition. That's because we're trying to see at which level we're working. Before we had the little pyramid, but we never actually applied things to the pyramid. So we need to make certain that as I go down this path, what data do I need in each one of these areas? What information, because all of them are processes. So what processes count here? What do I have to bring together, the networks, the neural networks, to cross over the values so that I can see or have visibility into how things are impacting each other? I go down and I said process management again. It has not disappeared. We still need to understand how our processes work. And I find it interesting, and this is another area. I see a lot of organizations, because all of a sudden robotic process automation has surfaced. Okay, this is the next big area that we're going to go into. We tried data. We didn't really get that right. So now, you know what, we're going to try process automation. I've always said, and this is something that comes around constantly as we keep trying to improve our processes. We've run the gamut from, we're going to do re-engineering of processes. First of all, we did downsizing, we did right sizing, to make certain that we had the right labor forces. Then we did re-engineering, and then we thought about it and we said, you know what, how can we re-engineer what we don't know? And then so we decided we'd do process improvement. And then we looked at it again, and we brought in Kaizen, we brought in Six Sigma, we brought in all of these things to make certain that we could modify and change our processes. And I'm not certain that that has worked well. It does in some organizations, but in some organizations, if you don't truly know your processes, then how are you going to bring about robotic process automation so that you can then know how it's operating? So here's that operative word, know. I don't know my processes, so so making it robotic process automation may not work. And I'm going to just emphasize again, in one organization, as I looked over and analyzed a particular scenario of how they were working, I found that they had actually 9 areas that were working in the same process, and that all 9 of them had different processes that they were following and procedures. So we've got to understand or know what we're doing. The same thing with these information systems and how they fit in, again, data management and data transformation. So the flip side of that is, and you've heard me say before, I hear management and I begin to wonder, what are you managing? Because there's a complement to that. In most cases, you're either developing something or you're engineering something or you're creating something. And once you have created that or you've set up this program or you've done something, then you manage it because you want to ensure that you're doing what you say you're going to be doing, and you want to make certain that you're sustaining it or improving it if necessary. So we have all of these systems engineering methodologies and frameworks that we can follow as well. And in a lot of cases, they're not necessarily applied. And in most cases, we tend to minimize them because in most cases with a lot of organizations, and we're into artificial intelligence, what they tend to do is people say, well, that's too much. I don't want to read that much, or I need to make this simple. And then once you take it to that level without understanding the basics of how it came together, you have just this object that no one truly understands. So in taking it through these concepts, it's okay to understand that at certain points, you know what, it's okay to forget minor details. If you have proven that they work, then you don't have to anymore because the object works. But if you don't understand how the combined object works, then you need to also have an architecture or a schematic that tells you how it works. I always say, like with the electricians, I learned a long time ago that I really don't trust electricians when they come into my house and they can't read a schematic. If they cannot read that schematic, then I'm going to pay dearly. If they can, then I guarantee you they'll be in and out of your house in a half hour and you won't pay that high wage. That's why they charge you by the half hour. So if you have a skilled one, they can get in and get the work done. If you don't, and they can't read it or don't know where the details are, then you're going to pay a lot more. But that's just part of the job. So when we start these projects, we've got to be realistic about the phases we have to take them through, the work that has to be done, and also the resources that need to be on it, because the cadence of the project is based on the resources and the work being performed. So once again, when we look at this, you'll notice that we integrated with planning. So we make certain that our management is totally aligned with what we say we're doing with engineering. We do this conceptual type of operation so that we can say, okay, this definitely will work. We have something, and this is knowledge. So a concept helps you with knowledge. This concept tells us that these are the pieces we need. This is what we know will work. And so now we can move forward with the definition and design of it. So we start laying it out. Now, here's also something into that. When you have skilled people, an expert can do things 3 times faster than a novice. And that's not saying that novices should not be added into a project, but a lot of times organizations need to realize that on startup, you may have to make a larger investment, but you also need to make certain that you transfer, and here's that knowledge management again, transfer that knowledge over to the novice or the layman who's coming in, so that when you move along into operations, the cost goes down because you eliminate the experts, so to speak, because the expertise now is moved into the people who are sustaining the organization. So you don't need as many. So that's one of the things that you need to think with engineering as well, because most organizations, when they do startup, a lot of times they want to start up with minimal. And then in the maintenance phase, they spend 99% of the budget maintaining because of not having the proper expertise in the front end of the system. So maybe we need to flip that so that we understand that you kind of invest in more early on so that later on you actually invest less. Same thing with the product lifecycle management. We have the product lifecycle, which also gives us quite a few areas that we need to think about. You know, when we're developing products, it's not that we just jump out there and we don't have anything to start with. Product engineering is like the systems engineering, except for it, you know, and it ties into the management. So we must integrate it again into management, and we must have those concepts. And a lot of times we always had them. I think in product engineering, we actually do a little bit better than we do with system engineering, because product, for some reason, when it's tangible, people think, well, we need to have these diagrams and we need to have these layouts, and that's where they had CAD and those types of design. When it gets to systems engineering, we have those same tools, but when you go into organizations, those tools aren't used. When I went into an organization and they didn't, I would say, well, where are my tools? And they say, well, what are you talking about? I said, I need system architect, or I need IDEF, or I need one of these tools that can help me to lay out the processes and lay out the people and lay out the data structures that are necessary for me to develop the system. Well, with product lifecycle, because it's a product and they're tangible pieces, a lot of the developers actually use these tools, and these tools are highly provided for them so that the product can come out and be tested properly. So here we have project management methodologies, we have system engineering methodologies, and we have product engineering methodologies. And we need to learn how to integrate them so that we have a proper management and a proper engineering that come together so that we can have a successful project. And in both of these, when we're talking, think about it, like I was saying earlier, those concepts have given us knowledge of what we need and how we need to move forward with it. And the engineering is actually giving us those pieces that we need to build an intelligence that can help us to know where to move forward and how to improve later on. And when I say that, because even with products and we're doing optimization, think about it. We can actually look as we're building and say, what is the life expectancy of a particular piece of that particular product? And if that is captured, then we can gain insight that this amount of or this product pieces will actually deteriorate over 5 years. So in 5 years, or in 4.5 years, you can start saying we need to start thinking about the maintenance on this project and or this product. That's why when they're doing even like with cars, when you go in, most of them will tell you, when they do the diagnostics, they tell you what you need to have done and when you need to have it done, because they've captured all of this information in the details. But then it's interesting when something happens and you bring it back, and a car manufacturer will say, well, we don't know, things can happen at any time. But I think we can get better accuracy there. And I think if people are knowledgeable and it has been communicated and they're aware of how these algorithms are done when they're doing the engineering, then they have more of a point of argument, so to speak, to say, no, this is what you have guaranteed me, this is what was under warranty, and I need for you to fix this. We have, adding to that, when we do insights, we have so many statistical frameworks and methods, okay? Once again, these have been out for years. There's nothing new about this. And even if you use spreadsheets, Excel spreadsheets, they have so many statistical models there. You can purchase them. There are libraries of them. But we need to take into consideration all of these. And this is also where I constantly say, then you have to also make certain that the economist is there, because they need to do the forecasting and they need to look at the future trends of what's going on. When we're doing basic statistics, it's just telling us the same thing when we build these systems. Even like in industry, when I'm with Corona, Corona started in 1812. The statistics said the same thing that they're saying now in 2021. And so someone should be saying, well, what is beneath that, so that we can actually see what is the root cause of it. But in the media, here's the communications again, and why we probably haven't had much resolve. We say that vulnerable populations are more susceptible to the disease. That's what was stated in 1918. And now in when did we hit in this? 2021, vulnerable populations are more susceptible to the disease. But no one actually ever goes beneath it and say it. So when we're building these systems, we need to think about the components of what would cause, or what could be the cause of certain problems that we're encountering or impacts. So now we've got 4 things to actually think about. We got the management methodologies, we got the engineering for product and for systems, and we have statistical frameworks and methods. do a checklist, have that checklist there so that you can identify what of these components you need so that you can build your structure for your organization. I'm going to stop for a second to ask if anybody has any questions around that before I go into these knowledge management areas. No questions? Okay. So either I'm making good sense. Okay, great. So now that I've talked about that front end piece and how we have to make those, put those together, I want to talk about some of the KM things that we also need to consider when we're doing these projects. And I kind of touched on it a little bit when I talked about experts and novices. You know, peer assistance needs to be on these projects. Again, when you're bringing in those experts, you don't want that knowledge to walk out the door. And especially if you're bringing the experts in under the formation of contractors. You don't want all of a sudden the contract to run out and all the knowledge walk out the door. So peer assistance, we want to be, it's a pairing of experience with novice. So we want to make certain that we're transferring and make certain that we know what we're transferring. Okay. So when we look at this and we're looking at the knowledge and insights of this, we have mentoring, peer assist, you know, and basically you're pulling together this information, you're making certain that you have people working together, and then you're kind of testing in a way to make certain that you're transferring. So we have, and I'll talk about a few things. We learned before, knowledge can be immediately applied. So you can have these small sessions to actually transfer, and then pretty much, like I said, test to see if it's transferred so that people can go back and begin working. You have on-the-job experience, on-the-job training, you have research evidence that people can learn and start applying as well. Collective learning, you know, in a lot of places, I know there's this one compound, the National Geospatial Agency. If you go into their compound, their entire compound is built based on collective learning. And when I taught there once, and it was one of the best places I had taught because every place was geared toward collaboration. When you walk through the building, there were areas that had, you know, just where people could come together and talk and share, and it was just amazing to me. And when I worked with the geospatial engineers there, they all shared, they all talked, they all collaborated. And I was just totally blown away because they were all totally professional, totally experienced people, but they worked excellent together. You have the evaluating peer review, a tool in the evaluation stage, you know, and this is very important because those peer reviews at the end actually let you know that you did what you say you were going to be doing, or that you're on target. You know, the peer review is sort of that quality thing where you can do verification and validation. Now, the only way this could happen is with the planning stage, though. Remember, you're doing peer assist, you have planning, you're transferring knowledge so that the work is done properly. And then when you get to peer review, you're actually evaluating it to see if you have done this properly and you have met all of the requirements. That's that word that we always look for, the requirements, right? This can be formal or informal. A lot of times you see at the end of a session or the end of a where milestones happen, you do a formal review. But when I'm doing projects, I have informal peer reviews and I pair people up. Here you go with peer assist and also peer review. So when you finish something, you actually have a peer review with one of your peers so that they can look at it and they know what they're looking at and they know how to evaluate it. And a sheet is turned in so that we know that we're on the right path. I want to emphasize too, when you're doing the peer review, focus on a learning process. A lot of times we'll do these peer reviews and there's no outcome of it, or there's no verification that what was to be learned is learned. You need to make certain that that is a part of it. This is part of knowledge management. So we're doing knowledge transfer here. You know, again, multidisciplinary teams. a lot of times what a lot of people complain about is they don't know how the pieces come together. So a lot of times it's good to bring everybody together so that you can see the role that each person plays and the responsibility that each person has. And that's not necessarily trying to cause everybody to know everything, but at least you know who you can go to when you're having a problem with something that is interfacing with what you're doing, okay? Incorporate the feedback from peers, very important. But again, we get into this thing, and this is part of why these projects matter. We get into the thing of organizational behavior here as well. When you do peer reviews and also feedback, you have to make certain that people feel that it's equal, because sometimes you can get people who will, I don't want to say sabotage, but who feel that they're not valuable, so they may not give their all, okay? And doing peer
Andy,
reviews. Uh-huh.
there's someone asking if when you're speaking about the planning stage, you mean PDR stage, the PDR milestone, or the
Yes.
PDR gateway. Great.
Yeah.
And there's another question. People are asking as to the difference between a peer assist and lessons learned. And it's not the same. So it's good if you elaborate on it a few minutes before we go on, if you have 2 minutes.
Yeah, a peer assist basically is you're mentoring, you're there with them and you're working through it. When a lessons learned happens, generally that you do that after a task has happened, and you talk about the things that the obstacles that occurred and how you got over the obstacles. And you also can talk about the best practices. So I know a lot of times under the lessons learned, people only say lessons learned, but you can talk about best practices and lessons learned, so that after you've gone through, you're aware of things that I should probably continue doing. And then you're also aware of obstacles that I could avoid, or if they occur, I can handle. So the peer assist is working with them. The lessons learned is what transpired and how we handled it. Does that answer it?
I think it explains it.
Okay.
If there are additional questions, please ask them on the chat, and we will continue and add them at the end of the session.
Okay. And now I come to it. One of them, fundamentals of a peer assist. Again, it's helping. You can even let me go through some of these so that we can be clear, because I've just kind of made that one clear. But these are fundamentals of what needs to happen in order for it to be successful. So if you're going to do peer assist, you must have a clear purpose, and it must be defined. Okay, has the problem already been solved? You must be clear whether you're in the process of solving a problem, or if you're in the process of understanding it or clarity, because you want to make certain that a person doesn't come in and you're peer assisting them, that you are giving a solution when the problem hasn't been solved yet and they don't understand what the problem is. You can enlist the help of a facilitator if it becomes difficult to communicate. And hopefully that's not necessary, especially if it's like a one-on-one or one-on-two type of peer assist. Pay attention to timing. I know that with timing, and this was mine, I had an escalation plan. If and I would encourage people to pick their own person that would assist them, so to speak. If you take 2 hours to try to resolve a problem or understand a task or anything like that, if you don't, then engage one of your peers. And if you and your peer work on it for about 2 hours and it doesn't, then engage an expert. And if that doesn't work, then you come to me as the manager. So that was my way of making certain that we didn't go more than a day in trying to resolve something, especially with the peer assist, because you're using 2 or more people. Select the participants. I think it's self-select, but a lot of times people will bring those participants together for a peer assist when it's more of them. A lot of times I like for it to be more of a one-on-one and then gradually lead to more participants. Be clear about the deliverables. If we have had planning and we have everything laid out, the scoping and who's responsible, then the deliverables should be clear. Always in your schedule, build time for socializing. Like I said, I would give 8 hours, which may or may not happen, but that 8 hours is slack time that's built in the schedule in the event that it does happen. And it might be that you build it several times in the different tasks. Mine was, I'd like to, most people, and what you find is most people work maybe like continuously, and this is average. This is not the normal. I mean, this is the average. This is not the maximum or the minimum. A lot of people work 5 hours a day because they take time to go get coffee. They take time to stop and think for a second. They take time to talk to others. They go to the restroom. So you might get 5 really good hours of work out of a person. Now, there are those who you will get 8 out of that, those hours don't matter and they'll stay there for 11 hours at a day. But if you build that into your schedule, a lot of times you'll even find that people will work under or over that, but you'll actually come out good with the schedule with socializing in it. The ground rules. You have to establish ground rules, especially when you have multiple personalities and different types of people who believe in different ways of doing things. There has to be a way that allow people to know that, there are so many ways that you can do something that is correct, and nobody's way is absolutely wrong, but coming together in collaboration, you're going to pick the best fit. And that might come from several people, or it might come from one. Share information and context. Again, the whole emphasis is sharing that knowledge so that we can actually come up with the proper workload or the proper work to be completed. And one thing that we always have to make certain that loop back, feedback is a must. We must have open for questions and feedback. And in all of this, you don't want to lose the opportunity to capture it. Now, especially with our AI, we have a lot of different ways now to capture the things that we are doing so that we don't lose them. So here's another combination that we can bring. While we're capturing this knowledge in our peer assists or our peer reviews, we now have tools. Like right now, we're recording this. And even with recording, sometimes it's difficult to actually write out the notes, but now they actually have tools that will actually create the transcript for you. And some of them are good and some of them are not so good. So we need to weigh out which ones to use, because you don't want to spend 10 hours cleaning up a transcript. You want something that's able to understand or interpret the language that's being spoken or who's speaking, so that it takes minimum time to actually clean up the transcript. We talked about document management, and as I just said, you don't want to lose this information. So as we're going along, we need to build into our structures ways of capturing that knowledge as we're going along. And we need to also, and here's where knowledge management comes in too, we need to be able to put it into structures where we can actually search it, search optimization, or we can navigate to it fairly easy so that we don't have to waste time trying to find things that exist on our networks. So with emphasizing that, we want to make it a seamless part of work. So let's think about that prior to. How do I capture these documents and how do I use them? And I'm actually going to emphasize this again, because with project management, and I don't know if you've ever read The Mythical Man Month by Frederick Brooks, but The Mythical Man Month was done and then it was redone, and it told you all the things that could possibly go wrong with the project management, with a project when using project management. And even as it was rewritten 20 years later, there were the exact same problems. And when you look also, projects, every time we go to start a project, for some reason, we start from square one. We don't have the documents that we can reuse, or we do have the documents that we can reuse. And someone will say, well, those documents are of no value to me. We need to start our own. And even like with project management, a lot of times when we would write the plans, we would write the plans to check off the box. So it would only be theory. So then when we went to reuse, it didn't add any value again. So somehow or another, we have got to get to a point where we have it aligned with our practice so that we can understand what was done and we can actually reuse. There's the knowledge management again. We can reuse this knowledge and we don't have to always come in and recreate the same documents or the same work. We can leverage them as templates. I don't want to talk to each of these separately. So what are some of the features and benefits that we have when we start talking? I've been throwing some things out there at you. We now have cloud access, which allows us to share. We can now anywhere, anytime, and people can get access to information they need. We have an intelligent organization. Hopefully we now have the neural networks that ties our information together so that we can have more visibility into it. We now have more attractive user interfaces. And again, that's based on the tools that you buy. We now, if you look at it, we do have voice recognition. We do have natural language processing. We do have natural language interfaces, and it works, but we have to incorporate these into how we're working. We have versioning so that it is automatic. I'm sorry, backup, robust search features. The robust search features, I want to touch on this for a second too, because a lot of times we always complain that the searches are not good. I hear people say, well, I don't know what I'm getting. How do I know I'm getting the right thing? Or I'm not certain of how I can find what I need to find. I want to give you an example of one that I did when an organization was complaining about the search. So I wanted to play a game, and I called the game Go Fish, and then I called it Toss. And so I said, here's what we're going to do, because they had a portal. I said, we're going to take the taxonomy, and what we're going to do is we're going to take the documents, and we're going to actually let them, with the toss, we're going to let them put the taxonomy value on the particular document that they would go and search for it. And then when we tell them to go fish, we're going to tell them the document and tell them to go find it, okay? And these were all managers and executives, because I wanted them to see that you must train people on how to search, because sometimes it's a different mindset and you must apply different type of English concepts to it. So with the Go Fish, when I gave them the documents and I said, go fish and find it, 99% of the time they did not find the document because they were not, I guess, looking for it properly. When I told them to toss, 99% of the time they put the right taxonomy value on the document. So how do you explain this? They understand how the document should be tagged, but they don't understand how to retrieve the document when it's actually tagged properly. So that was something that we had to reconcile. And for some reason, the mindset wasn't that I look for it the same way that I practice it. And once we reconciled that, and I said, no, you look for it based on, unlike English language, you look for the noun, and then you can look for the adjective, because that's the way your taxonomy is structured. Then we had no other problem. So they were able to take the English sentence and then parse it so that they could use the proper tagging values, which is how it was tagged in the system. So a lot of times these search features, we really need to train, and that's another thing that needs to happen so that the mindset is proper on how I go about retrieving. We have versioning now, which is automated. When you load something up, it does versioning. Now, one of the things that gets confusing here is that there's a process called check in and check out. You check it out so that no one else can change it while you are working on it, and then you check it back in when it's ready to be used by the public, okay? Now, that will cause a version, but there's another feature called download and upload that people confuse. So what they do is they download it and then they upload it, and they wonder why the versioning isn't there. The versioning is not there is because when you download, you actually create a new document, and when you upload, you're creating a new document. So that's another training feature that needs to be put into place so we understand how the versioning works. And then we, of course, we have permissions, having access to the data. And then not only with the permissions of not having access, we need to let people know what are the criteria and the conditions to have access to or permission, and then how they can gain it or who they can contact to actually get access. Universal format support. This is something that is going to really, I think this is going to be a major problem, because a lot of the packages out there now understand that they have to handle all types of formats, but I don't think that they have the resources, so to speak, to maintain that, because I see where they're behind based on the versions of the formats. So even though these tools are being created by a lot of different applications, it's no, I guess what you would call synchronization between when changes occur, and there's no working together to see when changes occur. So therefore, that causes problems where you have mismatched versions, and therefore it doesn't support the formats that might have changed in a subsequent version. Categorization, tagging, and rating. Again, this is something that you have to train people on. Once you do the categorization and the tagging, everyone needs to understand how it works, because this is how you actually go out there to find what you need to find and the knowledge that you need to know. And just talk, I'm gonna touch a little bit on benefits, because I mean, with cloud, we have the reduced physical storage. So, we're now offloading things onto other suppliers because it's going to be more service oriented, which brings about lower costs and instant access, because things are readily there. Again, but it all depends on, even if the access is there, can you find it? Improve regulatory compliance. I'm not certain that that's a true statement right now. It could be, but a lot of times when we build these, we tend to forget about regulations, and we could tend to forget about compliance, because when we put data out there or we put documents out there, we need to classify them. And in some cases, they're classified properly. In other cases, they're not. Sometimes they're classified and they're not classified throughout the organization. So something that comes in could go out in a record, and the record could be classified as public, but the data could have been sensitive that went on it. So those are things that we need to work with. I do think we have very robust indexing. I mean, the internet is actually evidence of that, but we still need to actually maintain a architecture of that indexing so that we understand how data is being related together. It definitely brings for better collaboration, and it definitely adds to, I'm gonna step back on increased productivity, because I'm not certain yet until they really studies are done to see if productivity has increased. Because I know with technology back in Palo Alto with John Seeley Brown and Paul Strassman, when they did the studies, when we first went into technology, they found that that technology had added 0 to the performance of an organization or the productivity. So might want to look at some of those. And this is one of the reasons we need to think about management as well as engineering, and having visibility and insight, and having the proper resources that actually can track and monitor this information for us, so that we have good visibility into our performance and our productivity. And then enhance security. Security, I think that we do, but I also see so many breaches. And I think part of that is because we don't, again, plan out what it is or how we need to have our data visible. Do we need to put everything on the cloud, or is our cloud ready for our secure data? And it might be, but again, you need to have that confidence level that it is before you actually move to that type of venue. So with all of that, with sharing knowledge, we can put everything out in any repository that we want it in, but if we fail to tell others that it's there, then we failed. You have to communicate to others. We have to be more transparent. We need to make certain that when we're putting stuff out, and then again, it needs to be on a need to know too, because we can push it out to engineers that something new has come out that they can use. We can push it out to project managers that there's a new procedure that they need to follow. So we definitely need to have those knowledge officers or those communication officers that make certain that we're getting things out to people. We're either pushing it, or they can pull it, or however it works. I mean, and then not only that, that new people coming in will get it. What happens when you bring in a new engineer and they need to know things that were actually put out a month ago, but they're all in email, okay? And that's not a good form. And we haven't updated in the portal. So we need those people to maintain the content. And we also need the collaboration between the communications and the knowledge sharing, that we have resources there that assure that that's happening. So let's plan it out, let's execute it, and then let's monitor and control it so that we know that we are getting information out to people and improving their ability to find the information that they need or the knowledge that they need. And I'm not going to cover this too much because you can see that they're just different types of sharing. You're gonna, factual sharing. So, in other words, you can tie and link to things as well as that which is within the organization, and then when you actually put things together for knowledge, like I was saying with the strategic plan, and you're doing strategic formation based on thinking, or even when you have your algorithms, when we were talking about content, all of that needs to be shared. So you're sharing your factual information, your conceptual, your procedure, and your metacognitive. So we don't need to think that a document is just all that we're sharing. We're also sharing the thought patterns that are there, and we're also sharing, we're annotating things. We need to have more insight into it. And you know what, even if we have something out there and we need factual, we need to be able to link it to the book that we gained the information from, or the expert that we gained it from. So we need to put things into the context. So when we're thinking about the sharing, let's not just think I'm sharing a document, because when people read that document and they don't have, I want to say, the backstory to it, it's going to be, it's not going to be as easy for them to work with. When we get to risk, when we have all of that information, if we know about things and we have a good story on things, then we can pretty much come up with an accurate probability of occurrence. And we can pretty much think about what the impact would be and what the exposure would be. And we need to think about it in terms of real life. I'll give somewhat of a simple example of knowing. We know that before we cross the street, we're taught to look both ways, okay? And we know that before we cross the street, we should check to see if a car is coming. Now, here's part of everyday life that we've absorbed that becomes a risk. If I come to the street and there's no really light or anything that tells you, but even if it is, I'm gonna look both ways. And then if I see a car coming, and most people will do this, if I see a car coming, the first thing I'm gonna do is think about the speed of the car. And if the car is coming very fast, then I know the probability of it hitting me is very high. So I can make a decision on that, because I would think, what would be the impact? It could kill me. And what could be the exposure? My family would suffer, okay? And I wouldn't be living. So I'd step back. Now, some people might say, that doesn't matter, I don't have anything, and they run across the street, because it all depends on what the impact and the exposure is. Now, I can also look at that car, and if it's coming slow, I can say, okay, then this is the factual information. It could hit me, or it may hit me. So the probability of it hitting me is very low. But if it does, it might scrape me a little. It might break my leg. And what is the exposure? I might be out of work for a week, but I'll be okay. We need to take that same kind of thought and put it into our business when it comes to risk and probability. We know what some of the factual information is. If I have a project and I need to bring it in a certain time, then this is the probability that it will be successful, or this is the probability that it will not. So that just gives you some of the risk management that we need to put in place, and it needs to be tied to the impact of what we're doing, which is, what are the known risks And now, of course, we do have some unknown risk, and then we get into the certainty and uncertainty elevation of it. But the point is, we got to know the facts first, which is the car is coming toward me very fast. And then we can make some of the more decisions. Now we'll talk about curation. Curation does not just come into data. Curation is all over, because curation is managing a collection. We've heard about it in the arts field all the time. So remember with the content, and you said, boy, that's a lot. It is. We have all of these different types of content that have various different types of purposes. And so we need to be able to, if you need them, identify and find them, but they need to be organized in a manner that they can be shared. So here's the thing, who's responsible for that? Who's responsible for the curation? Do we just put one person there who covers everything in an organization, even though they don't understand the value of it? Or do we make it part of a specific role that already exists? Or do within every area of the, every area of, for the, I want to say for the collection, do we have a curator? Or do we also just decide that we're not going to have curators? We just put the data out there and don't care. Now, I will say this, with portals, that was one of the problems that happened. It turned out to be garbage in, garbage out. When they originally set it up, it was set up, the data was in there, and then all of a sudden everything disappeared and people said, well, I can't find anything. And, or there's nothing there. Okay, there will be nothing there because you are responsible for adding the content. And you can't find it because it wasn't maintained in the structure that was built in the, in the beginning. So we need to change this so that we have curators over top of the information, and we need to also decide what is the purview, or which collections should we have each person over.
Annie, there's a question out there.
Okay.
We are speaking about AI projects, and in many cases, the tagging is automatic, and there's a question, how do we take this into consideration when we're speaking about the project management? And I would add to it that I would like you, if you can emphasize on the unsupervised via supervised learning, that these are two different paths, that with one you have more tagging and with the other, or you have at least if you don't even have, you have the tagging, with the other you don't. So if you can explain how it works as to the questions out there.
Yeah, you should have tagging with everything that you're going to store, because you want to be able to, again, search for it or navigate for it. Now, the auto tagging is an intelligent feature, but again, it does not do it on its own. You must define auto tagging and train it so that it is tagging in the manner that you're training your people to be able to retrieve or locate or navigate towards something. So auto tagging is, and this is where, again, we need to define it. It is a project. It is not something that you just put into place the way like they're doing robotic process automation as well. We tend to forget that we are ultimately in control of the content and the decisions that are being made by the artificial intelligence. So, but again, there are companies out there, experts who can help set that up, but you must also then transfer that knowledge over to your people. Now, when you get to artificial intelligence and you're talking about algorithms, and you're talking about structured and unstructured algorithms, I'm going to kind of, structured algorithms basically are those that you know what the results should be, okay? Unstructured, not so much. So the key is, don't just get focused on structured and unstructured. Get focused on the concept or the purpose of them. How are you going to tag that? Because that's how the user is going to use it. You're going to go to practice now. I don't care if it's a structured or an unstructured algorithm. I want to know that it helps me to make a particular decision. So that particular decision, a tag is how it should be tagged, so that when it comes, I can look at it. And then if I need to see the details on it, I can see the details on it. So when you have those algorithms being built, it's the story around them that you need to know, not so much that it is structured or unstructured in a business perspective. Yes, they're different, but again, one gives you, you know, the result, the other gives you probable results. Does that make sense?
Of course, I think that the main point we are saying here is that in AI machine learning projects, as many say, data is the king, and the data part of the project is huge. It's the major part, the major component, and therefore things that in other projects, when speaking about a portal and tagging, it's okay, but it's not the main part. And here it's the main part, otherwise the whole building collapse. And that's why we have to be very, very careful in how we help the tagging and how we train the people, and do we have curation? Is to be very delicate. Do we have unsupervised learning or supervised learning? Do we have to do more or to do less? Do we have to train? Do we have to tag, etc.? That's it.
Yeah, pretty much. Yes, yes. And you have to data. And early on, if you remember, I emphasized that data is the foundation. We can't do any of this without data. We absolutely need the data, but I don't want to minimize either of them, because even with the data and even with the machine learning, if you put things out there in a disorganized way, then you're going to have a problem. Now, we need data and we need it to be correct, and we have our quality and integrity of it, but we also need that structure so that we, again, can find it and navigate to it in order for us to be able to use it. So I don't know that I can say one or the other is more important, but I will say that we need the proper organization in place so that that data is of quality and so that that content is curated. And I think those two major portions will help us to be more successful in utilizing AI and knowledge management.
Thank you, Annie, for answering. I'm just seeing that we didn't feel, but it was so, the time passed so fast, and we're already after 5 o'clock. So please choose where you are showing us one more thing or two, and the other things people will read by themselves.
Okay. Oh, sorry about that. I went over. So I talked to curation, and we had already talked to that. So the thing is, build a repeatable holistic plan approach, and you got to take into consideration all of these. Remember, each of these things have components with them that need to be integrated into your overarching plan. That's what's going to make you different as an organization, because again, if you just use what comes out of this generic population that we have, then that means all companies are operating the same. And let's be real, we all don't operate the same. That's why we had problems with ERPs. That's why we had problems with a lot of the other major technologies or disruptive type of technologies that came out. We need to look at our organizations and then pick and choose what needs to be there so that we can still be successful based on the way we operate and the way we execute, or that scope that we've put into place. And then this is the last one. We have evolved to complex adaptive operations. I've shown you a lot of things that have come about and a lot that needs to be integrated. That's why we're in microservices now. That's why everything is a service, and we need to put these services together so that they actually will function properly for us. So I just put a few things around it, even with adaptive complex operations. You know, we got to go back to systems thinking. We have a lack of centralized control. We're not centralized anymore. A dense, low level of connectivity. Again, we want to get back to that where we're tightly cohesive and loosely coupled. We got to engage trust in our system somehow. We got to shape it with the structures, continual learning, and also we have to have coevolution of all of these things that we're talking about. So with that, I have finished, and I thank you much.
I think we answered all the open questions during the session, but if anyone has an additional question, please raise his hand or please speak or please say goodbye.
Hi, Arif here. Just a question. I think one of the dimensions that I'm facing in my organization is that there's about records management, because there is a distinction actually between documents management and records management. And in what role do we knowledge management comes into play? Because sometimes it gets a bit confusing.
Knowledge management is it's not necessarily records management. Okay, records management is different, just like data management. Records management can be confusing sometimes because a lot of people think that it is just paper records, which it's not. It's also system records. Okay, so what it is even with knowledge management, we're capturing knowledge components that people can use and reuse for work. Okay, so what you want to do is, this is where data comes in. You want to make certain that with records management, which is regulations, okay, a lot of times have schedules as to how long you keep things, especially like with medical or education or things like that. So you're saving things. So records management from the start, when you plan, you need to know the lineage of that data throughout to when it leaves the organization, or it's retained, or it is destroyed. Okay, you want to make certain that how that information is used through operations is also done at the end. You know, I don't want to give out sensitive information on a report that shouldn't have been sensitive, because on the report it's public. All right. Now, knowledge management is a part of that. If you're doing knowledge management and part of it is your decision making, which you're going to share because you're doing decision making, do you really want those decisions to wind up on a document that is not labeled as sensitive in records, and that it is put out on a site public for others to see? You see? So that's where you got to kind of separate them. And so records management is extremely important, but it is the back end of retention and the destruction of documents to make certain that the way they end up is where they should be. Okay. And most of it's regulation and legal. Does that clear that up?
Yes, yes. Thank you so much.
Any additional questions, people?
Yeah, well, I just want, it's not a question, just if we are here in
comment.
Learning. So yeah, something interesting I found recently in my organization is that users are, if we talked about tagging, or how we want other users to find the knowledge we store. So I can see some departments in my organization that started to actually tag, I would say, let's say it's now? Okay. That currently people are started to add a tagging for this item can be interesting for, okay, for external departments or external users. So they're actually kind of helping the knowledge base of the system to find the right people around. Because, for example, we are working with Microsoft and with SharePoint, and SharePoint has a component of AI, kind of we found something that can be interesting for you on each item that you're working on. And I found that if it came from the people themselves that are actually tagging the contents, the content items, so then we can maybe build something, you know, that push the right information, or maybe more relevant information, to external departments and external users. So it's something that can be interesting.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Here, I think that we will end this session. Next week, we hope that Tony Ram will join us. He will speak about his experience as to AI KM projects. He's a specialist, an expert on both. So please come back and have a nice week, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.